First, I want to thank Robert Garcia for taking this work on a regional level. It was important to see it that way. And I have a couple of questions. I might push my button again. But you know, back in 1991-92, the Taylor Yard Committee was formed, where many of the grassroots folks were engaging the city, they were engaging the county. We filed a lawsuit against MTA, back then SCRA, for what they did in the Taylor Yard. You had folks like Raul Macias from Anahuac, who started forming back in 1995, 96. And we had this infrastructure being built, an infrastructure that spoke to social connectivity to the communities. Then you come along in the 2000, 2001, right, and start looking at it from a legal point of view. One of my first acts as a council member is to have the city lay down its legal sword so we can pay attention to what the advocates, yourself, others were saying, what should be done at Taylor Yard and Cornfield. And I asked them, let's back off, let the city acquiesce, let's make sure we understand what the community wants, and we build the parks. In other parts of the city, do you find that there are that type of social infrastructure and that type of community involvement when it comes to advocating for parks? So hold my time, please.
The short answer is yes. I think the urban park movement has grown in large part because of your leadership at Taylor Yard and the Cornfield. It's grown across the city of Los Angeles, across the county. It is growing across the state and even across the nation. I think the highest level of activism continues to be in the most park-poor parts of Los Angeles. Raul Macias and Anahuac Youth Association, Alianza de los Pueblos del Río, that includes the William C. Velázquez Institute and Mujeres de la Tierra. But the beauty of the urban park movement has been bringing people together. So it's not only the civil rights activists, the environmental justice activists, but also traditional conservationists like Trust for Public Land and NRDC. The business community, the LA Chamber of Commerce supported the park at the Cornfield. So I think your question is there support across the city for more parks and joint use of schools? I think absolutely yes.
But I'm talking about the grassroots, the folks who don't typically go to neighborhood council meetings, who don't typically go to the type of civic engagements because they're working, because they have two jobs, because they don't speak the language. Do you see that population coalescing in other parts of the city?
Increasingly, yes and yes. We're working with the Old Timers Foundation in the gateway cities to organize Latinos. We're working with community health councils to organize African Americans and Latinos in South LA. Increasingly, yes. That is where the solution lies, is with the grassroots, with the immigrants, with people of color, with low-income people. Absolutely.
A critical point, I think, in your study, and I'll come back, I'll push my button again, but I want to read this. Los Angeles pioneered the use of racially restrictive housing covenants. The California Supreme Court sanctioned restrictive covenants in 1919, and California courts continue to hold them as late as 1947. The Federal Housing Authority not only sanctioned racially restrictive housing covenants, but developed the recommended formula for their inclusion in subdivision contracts. As a result, blacks increasingly became concentrated in South Central LA, for example, and Chinese in Chinatown, Mexican Americans in East LA, and Japanese in Little Tokyo. Given today's policies of how we restrict housing, do you see any parallels with those covenants with today's restrictions?
Absolutely. We believe that under the civil rights laws, impacts of existing policies continue to have discriminatory effects, and impacts are forbidden. It is not just intentional discrimination like the laws of the 1910s and 20s that prohibited people of color from living in white parts of LA. Today, policies that have an adverse impact on people of color and are not justified by business necessity are illegal. As I say, civil rights, it is a civil rights issue, it is a human rights issue, it is an issue of equal justice in Los Angeles to have equal access to parks, to school fields, to affordable housing.
And this would prompt, I hope, my colleagues to consider that maybe we can build more parks, perhaps we can reassess our land use decisions to build more housing around parks.
We agree 100%. And we also urge you to act affirmatively, proactively in that regard and not wait for litigation, because that's been part of the beauty of working with folks like you, Councilman Reyes, is you get it, you have a vision, you're moving towards that vision with a master plan for the LA River to address healthy parks, schools, communities, affordable housing, green jobs, so that the resource bonds that are passed reach the people who need them most.
I'll press my button again. Thank you, Council President. You know, the beauty of this discussion, Mr. Garcia, and I want to thank Councilmember Han and Labange for this opportunity, so we can raise these questions and hopefully share this information with everyone. When I look at page 801C, and I look at the 3 to 4 districts that have the highest number of parks in terms of acreage, in terms of net acres of parks per 1,000 residents, that also happens to be the area where Zev Yelzowski represents.
Yes.
And yet he's the one county supervisor that's attacked this body, this city council, for our push in creating housing where parks are located. He's the one who's been saying we're selling the store in our housing policy, when in fact he is denying the children, the people of this city, the ability to live near parks.
Absolutely.
And these are problems that we have. The gang issue. We put a lot of money, a lot of policy language, discussions, meetings, but we haven't looked at the core issues of what causes gangs, and that is the ability for children to live near parks, to have diversion, so that they are not sucked into the gang culture. Yet we're being criticized for trying to open up these opportunities throughout the city. When I look at USC's findings of the makeup of our neighborhood councils, the makeup of the neighborhood councils did not reflect the makeup of the city. Mm-hmm. And those that are loudest voices are saying what we are doing as a body is wrong. And yet we ask them, you tell us where housing should go. We don't get a response. We have a community plan process that's trying to allow for that voice from the community to define itself, where housing can be placed near parks. Yet it is simple to tear down. It is simple for the folks like Zev to say we are out of control, we're out of whack, we are heroin addicts with money, with developers. I mean, these are statements that are being made that are so irresponsible. The end consequence is that the kids in our neighborhoods are being shot to death. Our kids don't have a place to play. They don't have baseball diamonds. They don't have soccer fields. And yet the folk, the person like Zev, who have all these park spaces, don't allow people to live there. Right. So we need to put our policy language in line with our realities. And I hope this council understands that it does take a brave act to do what's right. And that we should sustain our policies so that we can allow the whole communities to live near parks. If you look at page 18, housing restrictions, the landmark Supreme Court decisions in Shalley versus Kramer in 1948 and Burroughs versus Jackson in 1951 made racially restrictive housing covenants illegal and unenforceable. And yet we say in the post-war era, many individual white homeowners and virtually all the public and private institutions in the housing market did everything possible to prevent African Americans from living outside areas that were already predominantly black. The previous paragraph talks about how South Central LA, for example, was restricted to blacks, Chinese in Chinatown, which happens to be in my district, Mexican Americans in East LA, which is part of my district, and Japanese in Little Tokyo, which is shared by my colleague. So it's a new era. It's 58 years later.
Yes.
We should have a constructive dialogue without criticism and talk about what's real in our land use patterns and allow these kids to play in parks.